Muy buenas tardes a todos y en nombre de CEU-CEFAS sean bienvenidos al Colegio Mayor Universitario San Pablo, que nos acoge esta tarde para la presentación del libro Un tiempo nuevo, el renacer de la derecha, que es la edición español que publicamos con CEU Ediciones del título original Dawn's Early Light, Taking Back Washington to Save America, del presidente de la Fundación Heritage, Kevin Roberts. Dear Dr. Roberts, and distinguished fellows and friends of the Heritage Foundation, welcome to Spain, welcome to Madrid, and welcome to CEU-CEFAS. Para CEU-CEFAS es un honor poder recibir en el Salón de Actos del Colegio Mayor Universitario San Pablo a los distinguidos investigadores y buenos amigos de la Fundación Heritage que nos acompañan esta tarde en Madrid, especialmente a su presidente Kevin Roberts, porque su presencia aquí refuerza también una alianza y una relación entre CEU-CEFAS y la Fundación Heritage que hemos venido desarrollando a lo largo de los últimos años, especialmente por nuestro compromiso conjunto de formar a las nuevas generaciones de líderes comprometidos con la verdad y con vocación de servicio público. It's our honor to publish, Dr. Roberts, your book in Spanish. Thank you for being with us this afternoon, and let us express our satisfaction at CEU-CEFAS for the extraordinary relationship that our think tanks have, and let's pray for it to continue and strengthen in the future. Gracias también a todos los amigos que nos estáis acompañando esta tarde, especialmente gracias a don Santiago Abascal, presidente de la Fundación Disenso y presidente de Vox, también al director de la Fundación, Jorge Martín Frías. Gracias and many thanks to our dear friends from the America First Policy Institute, dear Joshua Treviño and Kristen Sicorelli. Thank you for extending your trip in Madrid and to be with us this afternoon. We really appreciate it. Gracias, en definitiva, a todos vosotros que nos estáis acompañando esta tarde. Para CEU-CEFAS es un honor y un orgullo teneros. Y para empezar este acto, invitamos a que suba al atril a don Santiago Abascal Conde, presidente de la Fundación Disenso, para que haga una semblanza del autor.
Muchas gracias y muy buenas tardes a todos. Querido Kevin, bienvenido a España. Es un honor tenerte de nuevo entre nosotros. Querido Alfonso, querida jefa María San Gil, voy a pedir a todos comprensión por mis dificultades para hablar y mi timidez delante de la que aún considero mi jefa y junto a la que tuve el honor de trabajar en el Parlamento Vasco durante mucho tiempo. Bueno, lo primero quería mostrar mi gratitud al CEU-CEFAS por brindarme la oportunidad de poder participar en esta presentación de Kevin Roberts y de poder decir unas palabras sobre Kevin y también sobre cómo conocimos a Kevin Roberts y cuáles son nuestras coincidencias con motivo de la presentación de este libro, Un tiempo nuevo, el renacer de la derecha. Presentar a alguien como Kevin Roberts con un currículum tan abundante y con una trayectoria tan larga y hacerlo de una manera corta, pues es algo que no parece propio, pero yo creo que diciendo unas pocas cosas todos entenderéis cuál es el perfil de un hombre como Kevin. Kevin es doctor en Historia, fue presidente de la Texas Public Policy Foundation y allí realizó un extraordinario trabajo hasta el punto de convertirla en una de las fundaciones más relevantes de Estados Unidos, lo que le brindó convertirse después en el presidente de la Fundación Heritage, que es probablemente la fundación conservadora más influyente del mundo. Es para mí un honor haber podido coincidir con él. Yo le conocí hace 2 años en España, cuando vino a visitar la sede de Vox, y desde entonces trabamos una buena amistad y comenzó una colaboración muy estrecha entre la Fundación Disenso y la Fundación Heritage, entre la fundación preferida de Pedro Sánchez, que es la Fundación Disenso, como saben, la que menciona tanto, a la que se refiere en el Parlamento todos los días, sin ninguna duda por el daño que les hace, y la Fundación Heritage, que, como decía, es una fundación la más influyente del mundo entre los conservadores. Y permítanme explicar brevemente el diagnóstico que compartimos, tanto en Disenso y como creo que en la Fundación Heritage, y es el de que las ideas tienen consecuencias. que merece la pena estudiarlas, merece la pena debatirlas y merece la pena defenderlas. El mundo académico, el mundo de la nueva comunicación, de las redes, el mundo de la cultura es previo a la batalla política y condiciona absolutamente la acción política de los partidos. Es lo que hemos dicho tantas veces y quizás hemos explicado pocas de la batalla cultural. Lo hemos entendido tarde. La izquierda, el globalismo y el consenso progre lo han entendido perfectamente. Dieron en primer lugar esa batalla cultural y después vencieron en la segunda batalla durante muchas décadas, en la batalla política. Allí tomaron la educación hasta extremos insoportables, llevando a las aulas la sexualización de los más pequeños, avanzando brutalmente en el adoctrinamiento ideológico de todo tipo. Hoy vemos en los libros de texto escolares de todos los colegios prácticamente de España, incluso colegios religiosos, las referencias permanentes a esa ideología globalista que es la de la Agenda 2030, y también desembarcaron con la manipulación de nuestra historia. En España incluso negando aquello que nos constituye como nación y ridiculizando hechos como la Reconquista, la guerra contra el francés o el descubrimiento de América por el que algunos pretenden que sigamos pidiendo perdón. En segundo lugar, tomaron las instituciones y las empresas hasta convertirlas en una correa de transmisión de esas ideologías perversas. Lo hemos visto en España también hasta extremos increíbles, como las grandes empresas inmediatamente hacen propaganda de la ideología LGTB, propaganda de la Agenda 2030 o del lenguaje inclusivo. Todo lo que ya está cayendo en muchos otros lugares, como en Estados Unidos, gracias al trabajo de personas como Kevin, que llegó antes de la llegada al poder. Habrá quien piense que exageramos con todo esto. Yo creo que nos quedamos cortos, que hay una especie de sistema de partido único, que en Estados Unidos ha sido por un lado los demócratas y por otro lado los rhinos, así llaman a los republicanos, que lo son solo en el nombre. Es el modo, quizá que en España entendemos el partido único de socialistas y de esa parte de la derecha acobardada que nosotros tuvimos la audacia, la insolencia de calificar como derechita cobarde. Pero esto pasa en muchos sitios del mundo, pasa en España, pasa en Europa y pasa en Estados Unidos. El partido único es ese bipartidismo sin alternativa real, que cuando se produce un cambio electoral en realidad no cambia nada. Lo hemos visto estos días en el Parlamento, con una única oposición, que fue la nuestra. El Parlamento ha decidido cómo tenemos que hablar y ha regulado cómo tenemos que referirnos al cáncer y que no se puede utilizar ese tipo de conceptos de cáncer, metástasis, etcétera, en el vocabulario habitual, si no es estrictamente para referirse a la enfermedad. Uno no puede decir que tal partido, tal político es un cáncer, porque eso ya es una ofensa. Bueno, hemos llegado a esos extremos y se vota eso con total naturalidad. Este diagnóstico similar para España, para Estados Unidos y para Europa, yo creo que nos hace entender que precisamente estamos ante la agenda que la administración Trump está deshaciendo y que la Fundación Heritage, con Kevin a la cabeza, desde hace muchos años, desde antes de acceder al poder, llevaba años combatiendo, porque la batalla de las ideas está antes que la batalla política. Y por eso yo creo que es vital que existan centros de pensamiento, como el que dirige Kevin Roberts en Estados Unidos, y que exista también una unidad de los movimientos patrióticos en todo el mundo, más allá de las diferencias de intereses que sin ninguna duda tenemos, porque lo que hay enfrente es peligrosísimo y está muy organizado. Tenemos a la Internacional Progresista, al Foro de Sao Paulo, al Grupo de Puebla y a todo tipo de instituciones globalistas. Y bueno, por si fuera poco, por otro lado tenemos al islamismo intentando acabar con nuestras sociedades. Y por eso la labor de Kevin Roberts creo que es tan importante. No está dispuesto Kevin a ser un espectador más en la decadencia de Occidente. Kevin y la Heritage Foundation han comprendido que el conservadurismo no consiste en conservar lo que nos ha quedado, sino en un inicio de reconquista para recuperar todo aquello que nos han robado y que merecía la pena, para recuperar el sentido común y para recuperar el bien y la verdad y la belleza en la acción política. Kevin, es un honor contar con tu amistad, tienes toda mi admiración y espero que todas las personas que te conocen aquí también te admiren y que si no, después de escucharte, puedan hacerlo. Muchísimas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias por estas palabras sobre el autor y ahora invitamos a que suban al escenario. Now we kindly ask to take the stage to Dr. Kevin Roberts, Jorge Soley, responsable de Relaciones Internacionales de CEU-CEFAS, Edgardo Pinell, periodista del periódico El Debate, y Aurora Pimentel, la traductora de este libro.
Como podéis ver, no nos habíamos repartido los asientos. Entonces hemos sentado donde seguramente hemos podido. Como sabéis, bueno, Kevin no habla español. Entonces intentamos hablar un poco de inglés. Hay traducción simultánea. Hemos repartido un poco para repartirnos. Yo le por preferencia en inglés, a Aurora, editado, en castellano y así pues, también los traducción simultánea porque tenemos un página. So, first of all, Kevin, welcome to Spain, welcome to Madrid. Thank you very much for being with us. Thank you also for having written this insightful, very interesting book that we all think that has fresh ideas with impact, not just in America, but all over the West, and also in Spain. We have had the privilege of the book. Aurora has translated it. That's very careful. We have some questions. Some questions. We have provided this question, not for we don't try to embarrass you, but to clarify and stress some key points of the book. So, as in the book you affirm that the most important use in Western politics today is not liberals or conservatives or equal elite, but struggle between what you call the party creation and the party destruction. Do you really think that talking about right and left is today meaningless? And could you define it? Or what do you think are these two parties, creation and destruction?
Sure. Well, let me thank everyone for being here tonight. Particular honor to be here at the university. And I have to say to my great friend Santiago Abascal, thank you. How about another round of applause? And thank you, Jorge, for the first great question. You're welcome to ask me hard questions. You're welcome to try to embarrass me. We're going to have fun. Because ultimately, the reason I wrote this book is to remind everyday people, everyday citizens, everyday Americans, anyone around the world, that the party of destruction, which is centralized power over the last 80, 100 years, is focused on one thing, and that is the destruction of our individual self-government. It is that simple. Sometimes they shroud it as a European Commission dice in fantastical, ridiculous, even nefarious plans called net zero. In the United States, it's fashioned as spending hundreds of billions of dollars on what are purported to be good, just military conflicts that the American people are opposed to. It is another example in the United States and also in Russia, is spending far too much money on everything, which has aggravated a social and cultural trend, and that is the deterioration of the nuclear family, dramatic decline in marriage rates and birth rates. So what I attempt to argue in the book is that there's hope. And the reason there's hope, to paraphrase Winston Churchill about the United States, is that you can always trust the American people to get it right after they've tried everything. And we have tried everything. People in Spain, people in Europe, peoples around the world whose governments have tried to copy these long-lasting, good regimes, including yours, including mine, and they went astray. And it isn't just a problem on the left, although it is profoundly a problem on the left. There are policymakers on the right who have
contributed to this, particularly in Washington, I can speak definitively. And so if in fact we're going to be the party of creation, we're going to create not just a new politics, maybe new political parties, but we're going to create, even more importantly, a new politics of the heart, in which we draw a line in the sand and say, our politics must reflect the family, it must reflect the human dignity that comes from work, the dignity of free enterprise. It must reflect national security, America first, Spain first, the UK first. That's not at the expense of the others. It actually clarifies what your priorities are. And what is our heritage? What is our Western heritage? What's our American heritage, our Spanish heritage? And to have not just pride in that, but for our politics to reflect it.
Ok, bueno, yo voy a hablar en español porque cuando soy entusiasta necesito expresarme en español, que es mi lengua materna. Lo primero, ya se lo he dicho antes, que el libro es apasionante, apasionante, y traducirlo ha sido una gozada. Pero hay algunas cosas que me preocupan y tengo que decirlas, porque lo primero es la duda de si ¿seré yo una conservadora de museo de cera? Que dice él. Bueno, lo dejo caer ahí. ¿Vale? Usted dice en el libro que hay una conspiración contra la naturaleza, ¿vale? Contra el orden, la civilización, las sociedades civilizadas, contra el simple sentido común y la gente corriente. Y usted apela a una lucha del fuego contra el fuego y habla de una quema controlada. Mi corazón conservador se ha debatido un poco y quiero que me explique qué es esto de la quema controlada y cómo podemos hacer que ese fuego, esa quema, sea realmente controlada. ¿Qué hay que quemar? Metáfora. Y cómo hay que quemar y cómo evitar que caigamos en aquello que podemos criticar de otros, violencia, etc. Perdón, entusiasmada con el libro. Muchísimas gracias por haberlo escrito.
In English?
Yes. ¿No se lo han traducido? Yeah. Okay, bueno. So, I am very worried about about burning.
Yes,
What
okay.
we have to burn.
Okay.
Because
Great question.
really it sounds very dangerous, you know, for a heart who is conservative. I don't know if that's Wax Museum conservative, but something like that.
Sure.
So,
Thanks for the question. And thanks for repeating it in English. The idea of a controlled burn is a metaphor.
Okay.
And it's a metaphor that comes from forest management. And in the United States, at least, presumably other countries, including Spain, a controlled burn is a necessary practice if you want to prevent forest fires.
Here it is too.
I'm an outdoorsman. I've lived in the West. And outdoorsmen, but for that matter, people just living in their homes in places like California, have been victimized by the lack of controlled burns by our government. Bear with me one moment. Why has our government, over the last 25 years, stopped controlled burns? Because the uniparty, the party of destruction, has said that controlled burns are bad for the environment. What's worse for the environment than what we have seen happen dozens of times across the American West, where the inability to execute, to implement a really common sense forest management has not only cost hundreds of billions of dollars of property damage, but unfortunately, human lives. As I thought about this, as I was writing the book, I thought, let me take this idea of a controlled burn metaphorically and apply that to institutions.
Okay.
And to complete the thought, as the Italian theorist Gramsci said nearly 100 years ago, the left will march through every institution. And they have. Our governments, our universities, our schools. And so if in fact we're going to win, it isn't just going to be in the political arena. It's going to take this concept of a controlled burn metaphorically. You're not a wax museum conservative for asking that question. And say there are some institutions, individual institutions, like some Ivy League schools, that if they don't reflect the values of the Republic, why would we as a federal government give money to them? We're not saying go take a match to them. We're saying stop spending the people's money on it. And then there's some private entities, like the New York Times, or now even the Wall Street Journal, where we would say, why would you even subscribe? They are outlets of the party of destruction. Reasonable people can disagree. But the point for conservatives is that if we have any hope of conserving the permanent things, any hope of conserving those institutions that actually reflect not just conservative values, but human values, we have to be more proactive in realizing there is a host of institutions that work against us every day.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Muchas
you.
gracias.
Buenas noches.
Do you want me to wear? Okay.
Yo también pretendía hablar en español, pero con un acento hispanoamericano.
Fenomenal.
Es un honor para mí estar esta noche compartiendo los comentarios de este libro tuyo, Kevin, que es realmente apasionante. Y la pregunta, y luego la voy a pasar al inglés, es que me llamó mucho la atención en tu libro la comparación que estableces entre la gestión forestal y la observación de la naturaleza, la vida en el campo, la sabiduría que hay en torno a la observación de la naturaleza. Y la pregunta es, ¿cómo crees que la migración del campo a la ciudad está haciendo de que estamos perdiendo el sentido común y desaprovechando la enorme sabiduría de la naturaleza? ¿Tienes traducción?
No.
No.
Poquito.
To delve deeper...
You have to use this.
No, okay.
I'm trying not to. No,
Kevin,
go ahead.
Kevin, to delve deeper into the topic, I'm talking into account the analogy with forest management and this enormous wisdom that exists in observing nature. How do you think migration from the countryside to the city or the lack of the contact with nature causes us to lose common sense?
Thanks for the question. There's no doubt, just put liberal and conservative off to the side, going back to Jorge's first question about left versus right. There has been probably one of the most significant changes in modern history has been urbanization. You've seen it in your country. Perhaps the most famous example prior to the United States being founded was what happened in England, which in the year 1500 had 3 times as many sheep as people. A lot of societies did. And then as that ratio changed, just to use that as a true, helpful measure, people started moving to London because of economic opportunity. If you fast forward 500 years and make a generalization about history that is true, certainly up to the 2020s in the United States, that urbanization creates a closeness in physical proximity that corresponds to, in most large cities, the rise of left-of-center parties. And those are, to tell you something you know, the bases, the political bases of those parties. And so there are 2 projects that we as conservatives have to work on. The first, which we have started working on formally at the Heritage Foundation, is to not forsake those people who live in cities politically. We certainly don't forsake them as humans. And to talk about our issues. If you think about national security, they care about national security, but talk about physical safety. Talk about what's going to happen in New York City over the next 4 years because Mamdani has won. Yes, we want to adhere to our values about the nuclear family and for us at Heritage being pro-life, but lead with those issues that matter every day to people living in cities that still correspond to our values. And so our project at Heritage is to flip, politically, 10 of the 100 most populous cities in the United States. Yes, from liberal to something more like conservative, but far more importantly, so that people living in cities don't see government as the answer, but see their own individual choices as the answer. But the second thing that I would say is more long-running. My great friend Josh Trevino, with whom I worked at Texas, and I theorized about this several years ago as we saw Texas, which we don't think is ever going to become blue, ever going to become liberal, certainly trend kind of purple because of this phenomenon of urbanization. We also, in our public policy, have to make it possible to remain living in rural areas. And that means that conservatives have to be willing to say, yes, it might actually be not only okay, but good, devil's in the details, to make sure that there are things like reliable broadband, there's reliable infrastructure in those places, so that in this era of remote work, these conservatively minded people are able to remain where they are rather than contribute to the problem. If we're going to see this populist conservative fusion, which is our project at Heritage, become the politics of the next half century or century, it's going to be because we have figured out, at least partially, how to handle this problem of urbanization.
Kevin, one of the top topics many people address when talking about politics is the issue of the elites, usually accusing them of promoting policies contrary to the common good. Patrick Deneen has written about a new elite, and you also advocate for a new elite. Do you think that it is realistic? What incentives exist for a new elite to emerge and break the dominance of the current one?
Well, it's not only realistic, it's essential. And in this era of misunderstandings, let me be really clear. Nothing against the old elites, personally. We at Heritage wish nothing but the best for them and everyone on the planet. But the reality is that some of the old elites in our country, even if you ascribe to them the best of intentions, which I'm willing to do as a Christian, have been looking the other way as every important category of institution in American life has deteriorated. So if we were to have an election on whether the old elites have done a good job or not, the American people would say, probably by an order of 3-1, that they have not. Therefore, whether it is Professor Deneen's idea of aristo-populism, which I think is interesting, at least on an intellectual level, or as I write about it in the book, less precise about how we get there, but just trusting that Americans will do this, that as we're creating new institutions, new universities, in the mold of Hillsdale College, the University of Austin, as we're founding new newspapers, as we're founding new media outlets, and thankfully we have the freedom to do this in the United States still, it is harder in Europe, that we're not just doing that in contrast to the old elites and their institutions, but we're doing two things. Number one, we're creating them to form the citizens of the next generation. But the second thing is we're making an invitation to the old elites to be part of this project. And the beautiful thing about American history, with the exception of our Civil War, is that we have had every 2 or 3 generations this regeneration. Our very revolution ostensibly was a tremendous military victory against the British, which I know our Spanish friends appreciate. But the real heart of the American Revolution was doing this precise thing. It was saying, old elites, you are welcome into this republic. That's the nature of a republic. But we're going to form new elites who understand this project is about America. It's not about some reformed version of Britain, which is still pretty good. We have to have that mindset in the 21st century and also come to peace with this certainly not being violent. It's not a call to action against people as much as it is an invitation to fuse the old with the new. And as conservatives, that's what our political revolutions, obviously peaceful because they're political, ought to look like.
En el ámbito internacional, el libro también se refiere, por ejemplo, al tema de China. China, que es obviamente el mayor desafío que enfrenta Occidente. contra la narrativa dominante hasta hace muy poco. En el libro, Kevin afirma que son ellos o nosotros. No hay otro resultado posible. ¿Y cómo ve la actitud europea ante el posicionamiento de China?
The result that's going to happen if we follow the book, but more importantly, if we follow the policies of the Heritage Foundation, is that when, for example, Donald Trump leaves the stage in 2029, the American people will realize whatever they think or thought about his politics, we happen to be very favorable towards them at the Heritage, that he saved America and he saved the West. Because he had the courage, the moral clarity to draw a line in the sand and say, how business has been done in Washington hasn't worked. Even if you posit the best of intentions to the people who did that, and that's probably not a bad thing to do right now, it clearly has not hit the mark. And so I think the results of this, whether it's the intellectual side of the movement or the political side, the politics of it, will be very positive. But I also have to say, before getting to your part of your question about China, is we have to realize this is going to be a long-term project. This is not something that can be resolved in one election or two elections, hence my comments about a politics of the heart. But as it relates to China, as much as we lament the tragedy that is life in communist China for the Chinese people, we recognize that the Chinese Communist Party provides us, in addition to the threat that it poses to Americans, to Spaniards, to the world, the example of what not to do. And sometimes, often in fact in history, that's extraordinarily clarifying. And so just to go into one more level of detail, if I may. 2.5 years ago at Heritage, we published a paper, a study, called The New Cold War with China. Some of the same voices in Washington today who don't like the direction of the conservative movement, which is personified by Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, complained about that study, saying that there would be no way that America could ever decouple or build a ramp out of business with China. There's more work to be done there. But the reason the American people want to do this is because they see the threat. And it's incumbent upon us, if this is going to be successful, us, whether at Heritage or as individuals, to continue to put good, steady pressure on our policymakers to be very clear about what our policy aims are, but why those are our aims. We don't want to see China as the greatest adversary in the history of the United States, which it is, just to say that. We know that, and we act on it because China is a threat to self-governing people across the globe. And that ought to be, if nothing else we say resonates with people, that ought to be the rallying cry. And then let's go build a political movement that reflects that.
Bueno, tengo aquí. Tema clase directiva y escuelas de negocio. ¿Son recuperables? Yo sigo con la historia de qué hay que quemar o qué hay que hacer de alternativas. Y una de las cosas que más me han impresionado en el libro se refiere a la explicación que usted da de esas élites formadas en las escuelas de negocios que ya no sirven al país, a las comunidades donde antaño estaban, sino a otros intereses. Se trata de una nueva clase apátrida, muy manejable, que se vende al mejor postor que puede estar en Pekín o donde sea. Y usted explica el proceso de la revolución directiva managerial que ya había hablado Schumpeter y habla de la necesidad de que haya directivos comprometidos con la nación, con la creación de empleo local. Y se pregunta, me pregunto, ¿son recuperables las escuelas de negocio? ¿O estos directivos, estos grandes directivos, vendrán de otro tipo de escuelas o de simplemente, como usted explica que venían antes, pues de un proceso de promoción dentro de la propia empresa, porque eran también los propios propietarios. ¿Son recuperables las escuelas de negocios? Es uno de los temas que yo le preguntaba con gran preocupación a Jorge Soley también.
Thanks for the question. Two things there. One is, as I write about in the book, and you summarize so well, the managerial class is a modern phenomenon. I'm not talking about individual managers, maybe some of you in this audience, being bad people. I'm talking about the process by which we form managers. And notice, hopefully in Spanish you're picking up on this intended nuance. You don't train people. You train dogs. I train dogs. You form people. You form their souls. You form their nature. Each of us needs that all the way through our lives, but particularly when we're adolescents and in college. And what business schools have done, most business schools, there are some exceptions, thankfully, is say we're going to create a managerial class that is this is the class of experts. Professor Deneen calls this the rise of technocracy. Very important contribution he's made, regardless of what you think about conservative versus post-liberal and his other work. The rise of technocracy is one of his great contributions. That is not management. That is being a mid-level person, a cog in the wheel. Now, if the wheel had a noble aspiration, then maybe that would be tolerable. But this has happened at exactly the same time, and it is, of course, not merely coincidental, that the majority of Fortune 100 companies headquartered in the United States refer to themselves not as American companies, but as global companies, which is as absurd as saying you're a global citizen, not a Spanish citizen, or I'm a global citizen, not an American citizen. That's absurd on its face. It's absurd on its face if you understand the patrimony of the West. For that matter, the patrimony of the East. And so what I argue in the book is, connecting it to the metaphorical control burn, is that business schools need to be reformed too. Most do. Now, the good news is there's hope here. In fact, in the last few years, there's reason to be pretty optimistic. But we need to either found more of those new institutions, maybe new business schools at universities that have the ethos that I described, or we should be hopeful that maybe there is, in this revitalized understanding of our heritage, the clarity we have about the threat of China, that existing business schools say, we're going to dial back from this managerial class. I think it is quite possible that that happens.
Okay.
Kevin, globalization is one of the big issues of our time. We experience its advantages, but also some negative impact in many areas of our lives. The usual narrative is one of determinism. We cannot do anything against globalization. This is an unstoppable tendency, and even indeed, if we try to limit some of the damage, makes you someone nostalgic and out of touch with the real world. Should we adopt this vision and critically, or there's room for an alternative point of view?
Global trade is good. Globalization is bad. There's the claim. Globalization, globalism, is just an academic term, is an ideology. It's an ideology that says somehow, some way, there's something more important than the interests of a nation state and her people. And I mean this as an academic. Philosophically, that is incongruous with our history as conservatives, our philosophical history, our basis. Going back to Aristotle. Read both his politics and his ethics, and the nation state is an outgrowth of ever-increasing concentric circles. A married couple, man and woman, which it must be because they must or may have children. A series of couples and families that create what we would call a neighborhood. I promise you this is related to globalization. Neighborhoods, communities, cities, as we call them in the United States, counties, states or provinces, and ultimately the nation state. Why is that important for us to remember right now? Because the proponents of globalism, particularly in Brussels, say that we're going to harm people if we even mildly modify globalism. No, all we're going to harm is the accrual of power that they have created over the last several decades in the name of something that sounds good because they've tried to equate globalism with global trade. And so it's incumbent for us as conservatives to make that distinction and say that global trade is good, or it can be good, maybe it's good in most cases. But in some cases, as the Trump-Vance administration is trying to get at, and they admittedly have some work they need to do to refine this, they're saying from the standpoint of the United States, we want to be a leader in trade, but it has to serve the interests of our people. And at the very least, we have to be intellectually honest about the trade-offs. And so it's both an economic matter, but it's become a political matter because the left primarily, few people on the right, have made it so. Our argument at Heritage is, let's be honest about the trade-offs, let's put the ideologies off to the side, and let's be very sober as nation states in analyzing the trade-offs of these relationships. I believe that when the history of the second Trump administration is written, that it is going to be a glorious celebration of this reset. Not because the United States is going to retreat into doing no trade. How could we do that as Americans? We love commerce. Not that the United States, on a related issue, is going to retreat into the trope used against us as isolationists. It's not what America First is. It's that we're going to put our people first. You put your people first. XYZ country put their people first. And where our interests overlap, let's go make an even better world. I actually think that's a very positive vision.
Pues un poco... ay, perdón, perdón.
Uh-oh.
Precisamente en el tema de la economía, de la macroeconomía a la microeconomía, es decir, a lo que se está viviendo en muchos hogares y en muchas familias. Hay un tema que personalmente como padre de dos niñas me interpela mucho, me emocionó también mucho ver en el libro la defensa de ese valor conservador de la familia, retomarlo, relanzarlo, y en ese sentido pones en valor el momento de compartir alrededor de la mesa familiar. Y lo exaltas como un patrimonio de la sociedad, pero el estilo de vida moderno, la forma en que está estructurada la economía, también conspira contra esto. ¿Cómo podemos restablecer una economía al servicio de la familia y no al revés?
Let me first talk about why I emphasize so much, not just in the book, but in so much of my public speeches, family dinner. Yes, it's a bit of a literary device for the book, but it's very sincere. It's very heartfelt. Because I'm a historian, we don't consider ourselves social scientists, but sometimes we're called that because we look at numbers and data over history. One of the gravest changes, the worst changes in American life in the last 60 or 70 years has been the dramatically declining percentage of families who eat dinner regularly in a week. Why is that important? Because in the same way that the deterioration of our schools, which have been co-opted by Marxists, has eliminated one of those institutions in society that lets us exchange ideas civilly, doesn't mean there's not a difference of opinion. The deterioration of family dinner has caused the same problem. And of course, it has even deeper sociocultural effects, even, we now know in the United States, psychological effects. If you think about the loneliness of the youngest generations in the United States, this is all related. And so I wanted, and I'll get to the second broader point about the policy of economics. I wanted to give readers who may not feel equipped to go fight in policy, to go be more active in politics, something to do. Because one of the brilliant things that the Heritage Foundation has done for 52 years is not just write wonderful studies. My colleagues who are with me here today, Dr. Coates and Mike Gonzalez, are some of the best purveyors of that. It's that we give the readers, whether they be policymakers or individuals, action steps. And so let us, as we leave here tonight, go have more family dinner. And those of you who are college students, do it with your dorm mate. Call a, as we would say in the United States, a high school friend. Do it in community. Now, the good news is there is a revitalization of this, very much connected to your second macro level point. I'll make another claim. The gross domestic product of a nation state is not the most important metric. That used to be not even needed to be said in conservative circles. But what happened, for whatever reason, I'll continue to research and write on this, is over the last 40 or 50 years, that became, and I'm only slightly overstating this, I'm going to steel man their argument in a minute, to be fair, that became dogma. And what I argue in the book is, well, of course, the gross domestic product is an important measure. The economy is very important. But neither is an end unto itself. The end unto itself for Christians is salvation. But in this life, the closest corollary to that, hopefully the path to that, is human flourishing. And the basis of human flourishing is self-governance, true freedom, the freedom to do what we ought. Economic relationships not only play a role in that, but a huge role in that. We just have to remind our friends, again, in invitation, not in condemnation, that we need to invert that again, because that's how it had been until the last 40 or 50 years, which is to say the economy reflects healthy institutions, starting with healthy families. How do you do that? First of all, you start changing your vocabulary on the political right and say, whether you're a political leader or policy, intellectual leader, that all of these things are goods. They are goods. But there are higher goods than others. And let's get them in order as we build these policies. I believe that it is inescapable that that's where the politics of the United States, at least, are going. And for those friends on the political right who aren't there yet, whether here or there, I just make an invitation. Everyone needs to learn from each other on the center right as it relates to the economy and family. As we go build this updated movement, old elites and new elites, it is going to be insufficient if either of those sides, if you will, says you can't be part of it. It's got to be both. And we've got to be in conversation. And what makes me optimistic about that is the right in the United States has always been willing to be in conversation with itself. It's the left who are the intellectual totalitarians. So let's go model this. And when we do, not if, we're going to have a 60-40 country. And we're going to be in power for a century, and it's going to be glorious.
Como vamos a respetar lo de la cena familiar, esa que hay aquí mucha gente que tendrá que llegar a sus casas a cenar, quiero saber si nos queda tiempo para una pregunta para dos. Una, y luego ya nos cortas, fenomenal. Sí. Bueno, la agenda de la prosperidad o la agenda de la abundancia que usted explica en su libro, frente a, bueno, antes ya ha salido, frente a todo esto de la economía falsa, de la que usted habla, de todos esos petardos de la sostenibilidad, environment, social governance, diversidad, inclusión, ODS, toda esta cháchara que hace perder el foco a las empresas, que te hace rellenar una y otro formulario de cumplimiento, etcétera, etcétera, y que una ve con alegría que en Estados Unidos parece ser que se están liberando de esto, pero que en nuestro país no hace falta más que entrar en LinkedIn y ver que todo el mundo, nadie se mueve de la foto porque si no, no sale. ¿Qué es esto de la agenda de la abundancia que usted habla, que es gente que haga cosas reales, propietarios reales de cosas reales, empezando por una vivienda? También propietarios de fábricas en el propio país. Cuente un poquillo estas cosas de la agenda de la abundancia y de la prosperidad que a mí me han emocionado, por eso de que vivimos en la agenda de la pobreza en este país, cada vez somos más pobres todos. Okay.
It is sad, and for your American friends, almost all of whom love your country, it is a source of sorrow. You have a great country, one of the greatest civilizations in the history of the world, and I'm not just saying that because I'm here. No, it's sad, but there's hope. So there are two problems with the abundance agenda, as it has been articulated. The preponderance of problems on the left, and those are probably obvious, but I'll state them succinctly. In order to create an abundance agenda, government has to be the answer. Bad. But there are some on the right, and I don't at all mean this pejoratively, that define abundance purely in material terms. Now, there's nothing wrong with material abundance. I'm going to be really clear. But if that's the only thing that abundance is, you're actually not achieving the highest good, and therefore in politics, your political movement is going to run out of gas. It's going to run out of steam. Because we're wired as humans to experience abundance in additional ways. Abundance in family. And I'm not just talking about by the number of kids. It's not what I'm claiming, although some people will think that I am because I'm Catholic. That's fine, it's good, but abundance in the quality of life. And so let me get to a couple of solutions. The first is thoughtful people on the right and on the center right need to reject the left's framing of abundance, which government has got to be the big part of it. I wouldn't say reject what our other friends on the right say, but modify it, add to it, and talk about abundance in terms of all of the other ways that we feel satisfied as humans. That's a really good way of putting it. And so what's Heritage doing? We have, as many friends in Spain know, published for years something called the Index of Economic Freedom. Sí. Great product. We will always produce the Index of Economic Freedom. But what we realized in the last couple of years as we're engaging with these issues is that's insufficient. We need to publish an index of cultural flourishing or human flourishing. And hopefully we're able to do this in concert with a lot of other groups on the right. And we believe that by publishing both of those, you can then begin to see where there's overlap. And of course there is a correlation between economic freedom and cultural flourishing. Mm-hmm. And then we can develop policies that flow from that. The more federal and state policymakers in the United States talk in these terms, the more they will be successful not only politically, but also in the policies that they formulate. What we're trying to do at Heritage on all of those questions, which does get into so-called family policy, is lay the groundwork for not just a civil, but a fruitful conversation on the center right about balancing, assessing all of these goods and which are the most important, particularly if, to come full circle in this response, we want great civilizations like Spain and America to actually exist in 100 years. This is vital.
Okay.
Kevin, some thinkers talk about the present world as they talk about a liquid era, liquid world, and a world with no solid things where we can take roots. This, of course, is not the best situation for flourishing, as you have said before, but causes significant harm and help us understand the disaffection that many young people increasingly show. These young people, they know what they dislike. They know what they don't know, they don't want. But when presented with what Russell Kirk called permanent things, they are a little bit scared. How could we attract young people to those permanent things?
First, by being authentic. And there might be people in the audience better equipped to explain this issue because they've experienced it the totality of their lives. And the inauthenticity that they have experienced flows out of the deterioration of institutions. Most universities, elementary schools, but let's also make it really human and personal. Families. And the youngest two generations now in the West have no majority support for any category of institution. The military, thankfully, is the highest. Law enforcement has fallen precipitously, unfairly, because of the media's project to undermine the rule of law and law enforcement. Even the church, broadly defined. These are all sources of sadness. So we have to be authentic, which is to say we acknowledge the problem. And the second thing is we have to acknowledge that in addition to the inauthenticity, policymakers, unfortunately some on both sides, but especially on the left, have aggravated the problem with really nefarious projects like the COVID shutdowns. The COVID shutdowns. And so a generation that was already believing that they couldn't trust anyone, that there were very few people to interact with, were then told you can learn 100% on a screen. But we're still no socialization. I'm not saying everyone who supported the shutdowns early on were evil. I'm saying that we haven't even had, as a civilization, the comeuppance that should happen. Heritage has certainly called for that in the United States. It's wrong. And so we have to, in our politics, God forbid there be another epidemic, respond differently, learn the lessons, but far more importantly than that, we have to be focused on building institutions, starting with our families, starting with our communities. Yes, political parties on both sides, very important, because beyond the politics, there are places of community association. It's just that the main thing that needs to happen is we, pardon me if you're an atheist or agnostic, we need to invite them to church. Because in the absence of someone practicing religion, whatever it is, any of us would replace that with something else. And if we're replacing religion with politics, or religion with AI relationships, religion with anything else, that is a spiral that even for this optimist gets ugly quickly. So I just encourage everyone, regardless of what your leadership position is, to be focused on this. At Heritage, we're tackling it both from the intellectual side as well as the political side, but very importantly, in the investments we make in time and money in institutions around the country. This is going to take a while to reverse, but the postscript on this, which is optimistic, is that we see some trends that are hopeful and that broadly defined or described as returning to church.
Finalmente, no quería dejar terminar la presentación sin hacerte una pregunta, sobre todo sabes que soy periodista del debate, un medio en el cual estamos dando la batalla cultural. Sin embargo, nunca está de más un consejo, sobre todo cuando hay una narrativa dominante entre esta lógica de conservadores y progresistas, donde ellos, a mí no me molesta personalmente que me llamen conservador, sin embargo, ante el gran público se presentan como los buenos, ellos progresan, nosotros nos estancamos, ¿no? Pero, sin embargo, en el libro haces una proyección muy interesante, cambias totalmente el eje y hablas del partido de la creación y el partido de la destrucción. Entonces te pediría un consejo para cómo replantear este eje de conversación y demostrar que el progreso que ellos proyectan en realidad es una destrucción sin sentido y sin propósito, como lo mencionas en tu libro. En otras palabras, que ellos realmente representan el partido de la destrucción.
Probably the best way I can answer that is to use an example in current events. Mayor-elect Mamdani of New York City. Let's say it was just as recent as 20 years ago that someone with his profile, meaning his background, all broadly defined, had been elected mayor. The expectation would be that he would govern from the left. He would build a coalition on the center left, because New York is the world's leading city of commerce, which we want it to remain. And he probably wouldn't worry too much about what conservatives think, but once in a while, because of the importance of commerce in the city, and because conservatives are better at commerce than liberals, he would nod to them. You know, he might go to a press club of New York meeting. He's going to do none of that, because you see, he's not merely on the left. He is the world's personification of a coalition that endangers everything. Neo-Marxists and Islamists. I didn't say Muslims for the New York Times. I said Islamists, another ideology. And that personification means he's going to destroy, or attempt to destroy. I don't think he will succeed ultimately. He will attempt to destroy any institution that stands in the way of that project. Whereas, you know, pick your favorite liberal mayor from New York. You've got dozens to choose from. They didn't govern that way, because that's not what the left was. The left was actually, for at least a few decades in the 20th century, a coherent, cohesive, persuasive policy program that saw a greater role for government, a greater role for the safety net. It was a largely pro-life movement. At times, especially under President Kennedy, was very muscular in foreign policy. Those days are so far gone. That's why I say you can no longer think about this in terms of left or right. So what do we do on the right? We go build. We definitely, as we have been doing every day at Heritage since his election, talking about what's coming and conditioning not just New Yorkers, but Americans. Someone of the same stripe, elected mayor of Seattle, another major American city. This isn't going away. And it isn't enough in terms of winning political votes just to talk about the conservative contrast, because that's not going to win in a place like New York City right now. What's going to win is a much broader, or a more broadly appealing message rooted in conservatism, in which we say that is a very dark future with no abundance. We want to rebuild institutions. We want to rebuild the politics of this city, not so that it's liberal or conservative, but so that it's focused on human flourishing. And if someone in the center or on the center right can emerge in the next few years in New York who could do that, and I can think of, I won't name names because then their career would be over. I could think of a few people on the center left or the center that if I happened to live in New York, knowing that the conservative candidate probably couldn't win, that's how we have to be thinking. But the good news is that other cities are in better shape politically. Most of our states are. Washington, D.C. obviously is. But it's the same project. That's how we have to be talking. And I think we do that. And I don't really mean this as a shameless plug for the book, because there are plenty of people I get these ideas from. We can do that when we look at politics through the lens of ordinary people who have suffered already from the terrible policies of the Party of Destruction.
Kevin, we're running out of time, so we'll stop here. Thank you very much. And I think that you have, with your comments, you have give us many reasons to buy the book.
To read.
Ahí fuera se pueden comprar, and to read it, because people will realize that it's not just a book. Sometimes people in important places, in the important leaders, they have to write a book because that's the way to show that they are powerful or something like this. But this is a book with ideas, I think, with fresh ideas, with interesting ideas. So I encourage, os animo a todos a comprar el libro porque disfrutaréis y os darán ideas y para pensar y reflexionar. Ya habéis visto que Aurora está muy entusiasmada y lo hemos ido comentando en la traducción y realmente es así. Hay muchas ideas que son muy valiosas y que vemos que realmente tienen una aplicación muy directa a nuestra situación actual en España. Thank you very much, Kevin.
Thank you so much.
Invitamos ahora, después de este maravilloso coloquio, a que nos dé las palabras de clausura al presidente de la Fundación Universitaria San Pablo CEU y de la Asociación Católica de Propagandistas, don Alfonso Bullón de Mendoza y Gómez de Balujera.
Muy bien, muchas gracias. Yo voy a ser muy breve. Simplemente quiero dar las gracias a Kevin Roberts, que es un buen amigo desde que tuve el placer de conocerle hace ya varios años en Washington, cuando acababa de ser nombrado presidente de la Heritage, por haber querido publicar este libro con nosotros. Es un libro que, como pueden ver, merece la pena leer porque es un libro que va a dar mucho que pensar. Quiero dar las gracias a Santiago Abascal por haber venido a hacer su presentación. Quiero dar las gracias a CEU-CEFAS por esa magnífica, maravillosa acción y labor que está haciendo como el think tank de esta casa. Quiero dar las gracias a todos ustedes por haber asistido a este acto y quiero decirles que sin ningún deseo por nuestra parte de poner en riesgo la cena familiar, tienen una copa que se va a servir a continuación para congratularnos juntos de haber podido presentar este maravilloso libro. Muchísimas gracias.